Hey class, so we're going to do some problems from the PASS AP test going over T accounts and the money multiplier to make sure you understand how to work these types of problems. The first one we're looking at is 2016, so I would advise having the actual question in front of you so you can kind of follow along and you know where we're going. Okay, so it says this is the balance sheet of First Superior Bank, and we've got our assets and our liabilities. In assets, we've got $200 in reserves. Now, we don't know yet from just this account whether it's required reserves or excess reserves. They just say reserves. And then $1,800 as loans. And our demand deposits has $2,000. Below that, though, it does say assume the required reserve ratio is 10%. Okay, so 10% of 2,000 is 200. So we know that this is required reserves as 200. Okay. So question part A says, what is the dollar value of new loans that First Superior Bank can make? And then explain. So right now they already have $1,800 as loans, and then the $200 they have as reserves is all required reserves because that's 10%. So the amount they can make, the new loans they can make is $0 because they don't have any excess reserves. They don't have any money to give away or to loan out. So for part A, the answer is, I don't know what I'm writing here. The answer is 0. Okay, they can't make any loans, and so make sure you would put an explanation after that. All reserves are required, and you would on the actual AP test you would want to have a little bit more lengthy explanation. All reserves are required because just explain reserve ratio is 10%. $200 is 10% of 2,000, so they don't have any extra money to loan out. Okay, so that's part A. Part B now says Mr. Smith deposits $100 of cash in a demand deposit account in First Superior Bank. Calculate the maximum amount of new loans that First Superior Bank can now make. Okay, so now demand deposits, he's added $100 into demand deposits. Okay, required reserves is going to increase by 10%, so it's going to increase by $10. So loans, the amount that's left over after we subtract out this $10 that's going to be required reserves is $90. So First Superior Bank can now make $90 of new loans. So our new T account, if we were to draw a new T account, this would become $2,100. This would become $210. And then we would add on $90 to this. So this would become $1,890. But it doesn't ask us to make a new T account. I'm just showing you what it would look like if it did. So for part B, the maximum amount of new loans First Superior can make is $90. Okay, and notice it doesn't ask us to give an explanation. We just have to give the answer. The answer is $90. That's all you have to put if it doesn't ask for an explanation. So part C, as a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, calculate the maximum change over time in each of the following of the banking system. So when it talks about over time or the long run, that's kind of a clue to you that you're going to be using the money multiplier. Okay, now we know that it's we're not just looking at First Superior Bank, we're looking at all the other banks after that. So let me erase some of this to give us a little bit of room. Okay, so it wants to know what's the maximum change over time in loans. Okay, now first, if we want to know how many loans overall can be made, we first have to figure out what is our money multiplier. And remember, your money multiplier is 1 divided by your reserve ratio, which in our case is 10%. That's the same thing as 1 divided by 1/10. And if you're dividing by a fraction, it's like 1 times 10 over 1, which is going to give us 10. So 10 is our money multiplier. So if we're trying to figure out how much in new loans they can make, remember, you're always going to take your excess reserves, which in our case is $90. That $90 we figured out that could be loaned out. Before it's loaned out, it's excess reserves. So the $90 times the money multiplier, that's going to give us $900. So the answer for part C, section I, is $900. Okay? And again, doesn't ask for an explanation. We just have to put the answer. Although it would be a good idea, always show your work on the AP test, okay? Some of y'all, when you were answering questions before, you just gave me an answer, which is fine, but sometimes if you show me your work, like they'll give, I'm not going to say they'll give partial credit, but if they see the answer in your work, then they can give you credit there, okay? So always show your work, for your for your answer for part C, you could say 90 times 100 times 10 equals 900, you know, and box this in, showing that this is your answer. But it's not a bad idea to leave your work also. So that's the answer for the first part. Now it's asking for demand deposits. And we didn't talk about this when I went over the money multiplier, but when it asks for a change in demand deposits, all you're going to do is you're going to take your original amount, that $100 that he deposited it by, and you're going to multiply that times the money multiplier, and that's going to give you $1,000. Okay. The reason you're doing this, really, you could go at it from two different angles. You could go back to the 90 times 10 equals $900. Okay, it's all right. Well, the new loans we had was $900, but it's asking about the change in demand deposits, and we have to include that original $100 that he deposited. So you could say 900 plus the original 100 gives you 1,000. Okay, or you can just take the original amount, the $100, and multiply that by the money multiplier, and you get 1,000. You're gonna get the same answer either way. Whichever makes more sense to you, whichever you remember better, do it that way. So, you know, you take the amount of new loans you add in the original demand deposit that he made, and so that's the change in demand deposits is $1,000. Or you can just take the 100 times the money multiplier and you get $1,000. Either way, our answer is going to be $1,000. Okay, so for part second I, we get $1,000. And again, it wouldn't be a bad idea to either include this or include this. However you got your answer, put that down. And then part E, it says, part D, as a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, calculate the maximum change over time in the money supply. Well, this one's this is a really easy question because we literally already answered this. The amount of new loans that you have is going to be the change in the money supply you have. So it's the same exact thing as before. It's just the $900 times the money multiplier, and that's going to give you, the 90 times the money multiplier, that's going to give you again. So for part D, we've got $900. So this is actually a pretty easy question if you know what it's asking. It kind of asks the same thing over and over and over. And then part E, provide one reason why the actual change in the money supply can be smaller than the maximum change you identified in part D. Remember, we talked about there's two ways that, this is looking at the maximum it can increase by, but if some of those people who took out the loans kept some of that money as cash and didn't redeposit all of it, that could be one reason why it might not increase by that much. Another reason is if the bank kept some of that money as excess reserves. Let's say they only loaned out $80 instead of the full $90. That could also decrease the amount that the money supply increased by. So if you just answered that for part E, gave either of those reasons, some people keep the cash as, as currency, they don't deposit it, or the bank keeps some of that money as excess reserves, that would get you the answer too. Okay, so that's the 2016 AP test. Kind of showing you how it would be scored. Part A is 1 point. Part B, this $90, that's 1 point. The 900, the 1,000, each of those are a point. The 900 is a point, and the E was a point. So basically, every single time that you're giving an answer, you're getting a point for that. Okay? So next, I'm going to give you another kind of tutorial over the 2012 AP question. That one's a little bit more complicated, but it's not bad. So let me go ahead and pause this, and I'll get the information written up on the board. Okay? All right, so now we're going to take a look at the 2012 AP question that dealt with T accounts. So again, I would advise have the question in front of you so you can kind of follow along. So it says the following is a simplified balance sheet for Metier Bank in the U.S. And so we've got our assets, required reserves is $10,000, excess reserves is $5,000, loans are $85,000, demand deposits $100,000. They also give us the owner's equity, but that doesn't come into play in the question, so I just let that out. Okay. So first part A, says what is the reserve requirement? And so all you're going to do for this is it's a fraction. So if the required reserves are 10,000 and demand deposits are 100,000, okay, so 10,000 divided by 100,000 is going to give you 1/10. So the reserve ratio is 0.10, or you could say 1/10. Either answer would be correct. Okay, so really, hopefully you understand how to do this, but all we're doing is we're just simplifying a fraction. So we want to know what's what fraction of 100,000 is 10,000. Okay. Part B. Part B says, assume that Lewis withdraws $5,000 in cash from his checking account at Metier Bank. Okay, and so the first part by how much will Meteor's bank's reserves change based on Lewis's withdrawal? So he goes to his bank and he takes out $5,000 out of demand deposits. So this is now $95,000. And you don't have to show that, you wouldn't have to, this isn't part of the answer necessarily, you wouldn't have to show this. I'm just kind of showing you what the T account would look like as it's changing. So that's now $95,000. And remember, your assets always have to equal your liabilities. So if he takes out $5,000 here, $5,000 has to come out of here too. Okay, the bank can't just give away $5,000 but keep all their money still. So he takes $5,000 out of his account. So then if this is going down by $5,000, the reserves also have to go down by $5,000. And in this case, they would just take out those excess reserves and give all that money to Lewis because he withdrew that money. So for the first part, they would change by $5,000. So $5,000 decrease. Okay. Next part, it says, what is the initial effect of the withdrawal on the M1 measure of the money supply? Explain. So remember, the M1, okay, included demand deposits like checking accounts and currency. Okay, so whether it's in your checking account or whether it's held as currency, it doesn't matter. It's still M1. Okay, in this case, he took out $5,000 out of demand deposits and now he holds it as currency. So the initial effect is there is no change because it counted as demand deposits. It also counts as currency. So it's kind of a trick question almost. The initial effect is no change. And then your explanation, you'd say because, it still counts as M1, whether it's demand deposits or whether it's currency. All right, the third part of this, of part B, says, as a result of the withdrawal, what is the new value of excess reserves on the balance sheet of Meteor Bank based on the reserve requirement from Part A? Okay, so, we had $10,000 in our required reserves because that was 10% of $100,000. But now, our demand deposits are only $95,000, which means we don't need $10,000 here anymore. We only need $9,500. Okay, so where's that extra $500 going to go? Well, that's going to go to excess reserves. So what is the new value of excess reserves on the balance sheet? It's going to be $500. Okay, so let me walk you through again how we got that. Demand deposits decreased by $5,000, so we only had $95,000 in our demand deposits, which meant we no longer needed $10,000 in required reserves. We only needed $9,500. Okay. So this became $9,500, but we still had that extra $500 in cash. It was just now classified as excess reserves because it wasn't required to be in the bank. It was just extra money the bank had. Okay, the loans hasn't changed yet because loans can't just change automatically. This is going to stay $85,000 until later when they might make changes for their loans. They might later loan out that $5,000, but the immediate effect of withdrawing that $5,000 is this becomes $9,500 and you have an extra $500 that shifts into excess reserves. Okay, so this will be $500. All right, part C. Assume that the next day John withdraws from Meteor Bank an amount that exceeds the bank's excess reserves. Okay, so maybe he withdraws, $10,000, okay, or $12,000 from his demand deposits. Assuming that no loans are called in, how can Meteor Bank cover its required reserves? This goes back to, remember we talked about there was the federal funds rate and the discount rate. That was the interest rate at which banks can borrow money from other banks or banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve. And that's the reason they have those interest rates is for scenarios like this. So the question is, how can Meteor Bank cover its required reserves? It could borrow money from other banks or it could borrow money from the Federal Reserve. And that would be your answer for part C. So kind of showing you how the point value would be, you'd get 1 point for saying this 0.10 or 10%, 1 point for $5,000 decrease, 1 point for no change and an explanation, 1 point for $500, and then 1 point for C saying that they could borrow money from the Fed or from other banks. Okay? Hopefully you get a little bit better understanding of how you might see a T account problem on the AP test. So, we looked at the 2012 one, we looked at the 2016 one. So they're not going to be on the AP test every single year, but they're on there frequently enough that you need to make sure that you're prepared to answer one of those types of questions if you might have it. Okay? So I will see y'all soon. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye guys.